Awakening. The first sound that reached me in that house was not the groan of its timbers or the scuttle of mice in its walls. It was the ticking of something that should not have been ticking, slow, deliberate, the beat of a clock long since broken. Each strike reverberated faintly, not against the air, but against the back of my skull, as though my own bones had become its chamber. The house had been empty for decades. That much the neighbors had told me, though their voices faltered when I pressed them for details. The wooden frame leaned against the gray sky as if too tired to resist gravity, and every window wore a film of grime thick enough to turn sunlight into ash. The door sagged inward on a single hinge, the paint peeled away until only raw wood showed, gray and splintered like weathered bone. Inside, the scent suffocated me. Damp earth and rust mingled with something sour, a faint undercurrent of rot that seemed woven into the fibers of the wallpaper. Dust lay thick across the floorboards, disturbed only by my own hesitant steps. My breath stirred it into clouds that drifted like smoke, curling into corners where shadows clung like cobwebs. It was in the center of the front room that I saw the shape. At first, I thought it was only a rug, torn and stiff with age. But when I knelt closer, I saw the lines, dark grooves carved into the wood beneath, winding into patterns I could not follow. They pulsed faintly in the candlelight, not glowing exactly, but shifting as though the floor itself was breathing. The air pressed against my chest, heavy, insistent. My skin prickled as though invisible fingers had brushed across it. I whispered nothing, spoke no incantation, yet I felt the room stir awake as if my presence alone had been enough to rouse what lay dormant. The ticking grew louder, not from a clock, but from beneath the floorboards. It matched my pulse for a moment, then broke away, faster, irregular, until the rhythm became its own thing entirely. The scent changed, iron creeping in, metallic and sharp, and with it came the sense of weight, not on my shoulders but inside my skull, as though something vast was rising behind the thin veil of perception. The walls trembled faintly, not with wind, not with the settling of old beams, with breath. Each exhalation slid along the wallpaper, carrying with it the sound of faint scratching, claws dragging lightly but persistently. I lit another candle. Its flame sputtered, bending sharply toward the carvings on the floor. The wax ran quickly, unnaturally fast, pooling in rivulets that traced the grooves like rivers of pale blood. The light revealed more than I had wanted to see. The grooves were not simply lines. They were shapes, figures bound and twisted, mouths open in screams that had no sound. Their bodies bent into the geometry of the circle, as though flesh itself had been sacrificed to complete it. I looked away, but the images clung to the back of my eyelids, etched into them like scars. My stomach turned, bow rising as the rot smell thickened. The house groaned again, this time with a deeper resonance, like the long sigh of a grave disturbed. I should have left. I should have closed the door, left the house to its silence. But the pull was stronger than fear. Something in me recognized what lay there, as though a memory long buried had risen to the surface. The carvings were not unfamiliar. They were a language I could almost understand, a story etched not in words but in wounds. The ticking stopped. The silence that followed was worse, hollow and immense. Then came the sound of fabric tearing, though no fabric moved. It came from the air itself, as though the very skin of reality was being peeled open. The candlelight bent, its flame pulling sideways, drawn into an invisible seam. The walls seemed to stretch, lengthening, as if the house itself was expanding to contain something too large for it. A vibration hummed through the floor, rattling the dust loose from the beams. My teeth ached, my skull resonated with it, each note scraping against nerves. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it was inside me now, vibrating through marrow and blood. The carvings pulsed brighter, faint light bleeding through as if from beneath the boards. Shapes writhed within the glow, indistinct but wrong, their movements jerking and broken. Shadows rose taller, bending against the light, forming silhouettes that did not belong to anything living. The breath returned, wet, guttural, dragging in the air with hunger. I felt it move around me, though no shape was visible. It brushed past my shoulder, leaving a chill so sharp it burned. My candle hissed and faltered, nearly extinguished before surging back higher, as though struggling for survival. I understood then, this was not the first awakening. The carvings were not creation but reawakening, a cage unlocked time and again by the foolish or the curious. I was only the latest to stand here, the latest to stir what should have been left buried. The floor shuddered violently. Splinters cracked upward between the grooves. Something below pushed against the wood, testing its barrier. My chest seized, breath caught in my throat, as if invisible hands pressed down to keep me still. Then the eyes appeared, dozens of them, wide and lidless, opening in the glow of the carvings. They blinked not with lids, but with the folding of shadows, pupils dilating until the room was swallowed in their gaze. Each eye fixed on me, unblinking, their focus a weight that pressed me flat against the boards. I tried to crawl back, but the air thickened, a syrup that clung to my limbs and held me in place. The whispers began then, not sound but thought, voices threading themselves through my mind. They did not ask. They commanded, rise, release, join. My body trembled, fighting against commands that were not my own. My muscles strained, hands twitching toward the carvings as if pulled by invisible strings. The warmth of the lines seared against my fingertips, heat spreading upward through my veins until it reached my heart. My pulse staggered, skipping beats, sinking instead with the rhythm of the thing below. The floor cracked. A fissure split open in the center of the circle, and from it came a hand, too long, too thin, with joints bending in directions bone should not allow. Its fingers dragged across the wood, leaving trails that smoked, charred black. Another hand followed, then the curve of a shoulder forcing itself upward through the gap. It was rising. The air screamed without sound, vibrating against my teeth, shaking the candlelight into wild flares. The smell of iron and decay filled every breath, coating my throat until I gagged. My vision blurred, black creeping in at the edges as though my body was rejecting what my eyes were forced to see. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. The fissure sealed itself. The light died. The room fell silent. I lay sprawled across the boards, chest heaving, sweat chilling against my skin. The candle burned steadily again, as though nothing had happened. The carvings were gone. Not faded, not erased. Gone. Only raw wood remained, splintered and ordinary. But inside me something moved. I feel it when I close my eyes, when the world dims and silence deepens. The rhythm that is not my own, pulsing beneath my ribs. The breath that is not mine, dragging through my lungs. The eyes that do not blink, staring out from the dark of my mind. The awakening was not in the house. It was in me. Cursing. It began with a book. Not a new one, not something I sought out. It was simply there, waiting for me, lying beneath a collapsed shelf in a thrift store that smelled of dust and mothballs. The leather cover was cracked and dry, the title scoured away by time. When I touched it, the air shifted, subtle but undeniable, as though the room itself paused to take notice. The pages crumbled at the edges, brown and brittle, yet the ink remained dark, too dark, as if written yesterday in something heavier than ink. Strange symbols ran across the parchment, angular shapes curling into grotesque forms, each one pressing into my vision with a weight that made my eyes ache. I should have put it back. I should have walked away. But curiosity is a parasite, and it dug its teeth into me that day. The first night I brought it home, the air changed. My apartment, usually silent, but for the hum of the refrigerator, seemed to breathe around me. Shadows stretched longer than they should, reaching out in thin fingers across the carpet. The smell came next, a faint copper tang like blood warming in the open air. I searched every corner for the source, checked the pipes, even the drains, but nothing explained it. Still it lingered, a taste in the back of my throat I couldn't swallow away. I left the book on the table, and yet it seemed to follow me. No matter where I sat, I could feel its presence, a low hum just beneath thought, as though the words themselves were whispering soundlessly. At night, the hum deepened into something heavier, a vibration that settled into the mattress, keeping me awake until my chest grew tight and my skin prickled with static. I made the mistake of opening it again. The second time was worse. The symbols seemed to rearrange themselves, forming patterns that locked together in ways I hadn't noticed before. They moved, not the pages themselves, but the shapes upon them, shifting slowly when I wasn't looking directly. When I blinked, entire lines had changed, and with those changes came sound, soft scratching, like nails dragging lightly across the walls. The longer I stared, the louder it became, until at last it wasn't confined to the edges of hearing. It was inside the room, inside me. My breath grew shallow, my skin damp with a cold sweat that smelled faintly of iron. I tried to close the book, but my hands froze. My fingers trembled against the pages, as though the symbols had wound themselves into the muscles. My throat constricted, not with fear alone, but with something deeper, something older, like a hand pressing against my windpipe. It released only when I tore my gaze away. The book slammed shut on its own, the sound sharp and final. The silence afterward was worse. From that night onward, my apartment was no longer mine. The walls carried whispers now. Not words, not language, but the hiss of intent, curling and slithering like smoke through unseen cracks. The corners darkened unnaturally, shadows congealing into shapes that lingered too long when I looked directly at them. The smell of copper deepened until it seemed to soak into the furniture, into my skin, as though I carried it with me everywhere. Sleep became impossible. Whenever my eyes closed, I saw the pages, the symbols writhing like insects beneath my lids. I woke to the sound of something breathing against my ear, hot and wet, though no one stood beside me. The air grew heavy with each night, pressing down until every breath felt stolen. It wasn't long before the marks appeared. At first, they were faint, thin lines on my arms, no deeper than scratches. I told myself I had done it unknowingly in my restless nights, but they were too precise, too deliberate. Each morning brought new ones, darker and deeper, curling into the same shapes I had seen etched in the book. The lines burned faintly, an ache beneath the skin that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. I hid them beneath sleeves, but they spread. Across my chest, down my legs, coiling around ribs and hips like chains tightening each day. The mirror became unbearable. My reflection carried more of them than my body seemed to, as though the glass showed what my skin refused to reveal. The curse was not written in the book. It was the book. And by opening it, by looking too long, I had given it passage. Days blurred. Time unraveled. Light seemed thinner, weaker, as though the sun itself wanted no part of me. My food spoiled faster, water tasted bitter, and the air stank perpetually of iron and mold. People noticed the change. They stepped back from me in stores, avoided my gaze on the street. My shadow stretched longer than it should, bending at angles unnatural to the body that cast it. Nights were worse. I would lie in bed, trying not to breathe too loud, and hear them moving. Not just whispers now, footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing the floor though no weight bent the boards. Sometimes I woke to find the book open again, lying on the table or beside the bed, its pages turned to new markings I hadn't seen before. And always, always, the scratching in the walls, a chorus of claws dragging themselves closer. The curse was weaving itself into me, thread by thread. I could feel it beneath my skin, in the marrow of my bones. My thoughts weren't mine anymore. At times, I would catch myself writing the shapes on scraps of paper on the walls, even on my own flesh, only realizing after my hand cramped and bled. The whispers grew clearer. They did not ask. They commanded. Their intent pressed into me like nails. Suffer. Spread. Bind. I tried to burn the book once. I thought fire might sever its grip. The flames took quickly to the brittle pages, rising high with the stink of scorched leather. But within seconds, the fire died, not faded, not burned out, but smothered, sucked into the pages themselves. When the smoke cleared, the book lay unscathed, darker than before, its cover warm to the touch as though it had stolen the fire into itself. That night, the marks on my body deepened, cut wider, blood rising in thin rivulets across my skin. I woke to find them fresh, red, raw, though I had felt no pain in my sleep. And the book, as always, waited on the table, open to a page I could not remember writing, filled with my own blood. I know now what it wants. It does not seek worship or reverence. It seeks continuation. The curse does not die, it only transfers, feeding on the next willing eyes to trace its lines. I was never chosen. I was simply careless enough to look too long. My body weakens each day. The marks carve deeper, hollowing me from within. My reflection no longer matches my movements. Sometimes it lingers, smiling faintly when I do not. The air hums constantly, thick with whispers that coil through thought and dream alike. I write this not as warning, for warning is useless. Curiosity cannot be cautioned against. It only feeds itself. I write this because the curse demands it. The symbols guide my hand even now, shaping each word as it spills across the page. The curse must spread, and I am merely the vessel through which it flows. The book is no longer in my apartment. I don't remember where I left it. Perhaps in another store, beneath another pile of discarded things. Perhaps already waiting for the next hand to lift it, the next pair of eyes to look too long. But I feel its presence still, in my blood, in the shadows that reach toward me when the lights flicker, in the steady, sickly taste of iron at the back of my throat. I do not need the book anymore. The curse has already written itself into me. And when I am gone, it will not die with me.